All right. How's the day been so far? Lots of new, it's like practical application of JavaScript now, right? Have to build webs or make web requests and build web servers and all that stuff that we've come here for. So more of that this afternoon. And I don't know if I guess I didn't say that this morning, but when I stand up here and I write code in front of you, it's not my expectation that after the fact you'll be able to completely copy and do exactly what I just did. That's not necessarily my goal. My goal might be to show you something maybe a little bit too complicated for today that you can come back to, just show you what's possible. It's not always my intention that you can write the exact code and understand every single thing that I wrote. So some of the things might be unclear today. I want questions for that for sure. But I think in some of these examples, it's really just to kind of show you what's possible. Because that's what gets us sort of past roadblocks, right? If we don't believe something can happen, or if we don't know it can happen, we spend a lot of time even learning that it can happen, and then we have to learn how to do it. So I'm just showing you what's possible, and then we'll take some time to learn how to do that over the next couple weeks, right? We do have a new kind of concept we have to talk about today. It's the environment. Not necessarily the whole climate change environment that we're all worried about, but more the environment that we're running our code in. We'll also call that the environment. It's the sort of set of configuration that would be applied, or the operating system that we're in and its configuration. So we can, we want to do a good job of separating our code and our configuration. The code is the logic of our application, whereas the configuration could be inputs into that application that result in maybe different behavior. So one example here, a piece of configuration is, you are writing an application and you've only run it locally on your machine, so technically it's all a development environment. And eventually we want to take this code and we want to make it available to other people to use. So we would put it into a production environment, and people would contact our web server, get responses back. I wouldn't use the same database for both of those, production and development servers. I would use a database for production that is only for production, that I do not modify when I'm in development. And in development, I would use a database that I don't care if I lose it. I could throw it away. I could bring it down, or take it down, bring it back up. It's just my own database. So there's two databases, and depending on the environment that I want to run the application in, the database may be different. This is a piece of configuration. So when I load up my application in the production environment, it has a configuration that says use this database over here. And when I load it up on my development environment, it says use this database instead. So that's the configuration I'm talking about. And we keep these things separate. We don't just put that value of that database in our source code, because then if we want to change which database we connect to, we have to go and change our source code when we could just change configuration. There's more on this. If we look up the 12-factor app, and the 12-factor app includes a section number 3 on config. And it's saying to build good web applications, we should do these 12 things. And one of the things is to store config in the environment. So that's what I'm trying to show you today, is how to store configuration in the environment. Cool? Okay. As I mentioned, our deployed code might make multiple connections to different servers, might have Amazon S3, a database, GitHub, or something like that. And we can configure the locations of those things through our environment, including things like keys, tokens, passwords, things that are even more, it's more important that we hide these types of things because we don't want other people to get access to them. It's very dangerous. If someone gets access to our API tokens or our secret keys or our passwords, right? We don't share our passwords with people. So why should we share the passwords that we use to connect to our database with the public? That's not a good idea. So we're going to do something. We're going to use a tool called .env today, and it's one of the many ways for us to get environment variables into our application. But before I do that, we have to look at some other ways we'll get some environment variables into our application. I'm going to head over. So this is Node app, and I'm going to create, I don't know, some new env.js file. And in here, I want to console log process.env out. So process.env is actually the place that Node reserves to store environment variables. we could run this now. And this just printed out for me a list of my environment variables. That's what this is here. It's an object. Oops. It's an object that has a whole bunch of different key value pairs, language, the path. So all this stuff, where does this come from? If I export, if you type export into your command line tool, you will see your environment variables. They'll probably be different than mine though, right? Because it's your environment, it's not my environment. So we've got these environment variables that are sitting here. And when we use process.env, when we use process.env, do this again. When we use process.env, we have access to those variables. If I wanted to add a variable to this, I have an option. I can export my var equals my value. Now when I type in export and I look for my var in here, there it is, my var equals my value. If I bring up a new terminal and I export, there's no my var in here. So that seems like the environment is actually based on my session that I'm in right now. Okay. What I'm actually interested in is not necessarily setting that value permanently in my environment. I would actually just want to set it one time for the execution of this program. So maybe I want to see .myvar, and I want to see what this value is. I could say myvar equals something, and then node env.js. So if you'll notice here, I'm actually setting the environment variable as I run the application. So for the life cycle of this application, as long as it's being run, my var will equal something. And that's why when my application tries to print out process.env.myvar, we get the value that I put in there. This might be interesting if I want to maybe set the node environment to production. Okay, that's how I could do that. That I would set the node environment variable to production for the running of this script. And then if I ran the script without that value, maybe it's not production anymore. Does this kind of make sense? Some ways we can add environment variables. So our environment has variables. We can access those variables in Node. Is that okay? Okay. I know it's kind of, there's a lot to fit into this hour in terms of that. So I kind of have to stop there. But what I want to show you is it's not just through export. It's not just on the line that we can add that variable. But we can also do it using this library that's going to help us out called .env. And what this does, it allows me to take my directory. I'm going to actually open this up. I'm going to take this directory. And I would have in here, in the root of my project, a .env file. And this .env file is going to contain all of my secrets for this project. All of my environment variables for this project that I want available inside this project for me in my environment, they're going to go in this .env file. If you were running this project yourself, you would clone it from GitHub. There would be no .env file. Why wouldn't there be a .env file on GitHub? It's not my, well, yeah, it could be my env file, but the secrets. We don't want to commit the secrets. So we exclude .env from our Git commits. And we do that by adding it to the .gitignore file. So .env is going to be, we're going to have the same code. Everyone will have the same code. But each person running that code could have a different .env file with different values in it. We could all have different usernames and passwords and tokens and still access the same surfaces, right? Actually, we all kind of do that now with Facebook and our email and all that. So this env file is going to contain all of those secrets, all of the configuration for this application for myself. And if someone else needs to configure their application, they would clone this application, they would create their own .env file, and they would fill in the blanks with what they need to. One of the conventions that you'll find for this is that you might actually commit a .env.example file. Because you're thinking like, well, how do I know which configuration to even add to this for myself? Maybe as a good developer, we just add the values in there. We add the keys, but we don't put the values in there. And then when you clone this project, you get .env.example. You right-click, you rename it to just .env, and then you fill in the blanks with what your information would be, and now you have your own .env file. So this is kind of how we're going to take this approach. And same with your midterm project. When you're working in a group, everyone will use the same code but different configuration. You're all going to have maybe a slightly different database name. That's okay. Doesn't all have to be called midterm. So, all right, let's get back to this .env file. So we define something like this in our .env file. And then the second step is at the top of our script, we actually have to require .env and call the config method on it. Now the reason why we have to do this is because somewhere, at some point, our node application has to actually go and do a read file on that .env file. It has to read each line, and then it has to take each of those lines and convert it and put it into our process.env variable for us to use. That's what require.env.config does. It sets it up and takes the variables from here and puts them in process.env for us. Okay. So once that's done, we can use it in Node anywhere we want inside that Node process using process.env.github API token or whatever we called it in that environment file. Okay. Sound good? I'll play around with this a little bit. Do not commit your env file. Super important. And I should mention it right now. Let's say that you committed a .env file by accident. What's the first thing that you do? Say it has a token in there that's yours. Is there something that you want to do that you don't know how, or is it just a matter of not knowing what to do first? You don't know what to do first. Okay, so if this ever happens, no matter what, you change your passwords first. You don't go and try and fix GitHub. You don't try and revert that change and remove a record of that env file. You don't do that first. The very first thing that you do, if you, for example, committed your Google email and password, which I've had people do in this, not in this classroom, but in a classroom much like this, the very first thing you do is you change your password. Don't call a mentor and say, what do I do? The first thing you do is you change those credentials. You go onto the website and you kill that token. You just say, generate me a new token, invalidate the old one. Now you have a new token. OK, good. Even though someone has my old token, it's useless. It's invalid now. Even though someone has my password, I've changed it since then, they can't log in. If you spend a lot of time going to try and fix the GitHub thing and then you go change your password, maybe someone has gone in, logged into your account, and changed your password first, then you're in real trouble, right? So if this happens, if you do make a mistake, don't worry about it. Focus. Change the password, fix it, and then ask for a mentor to come over and then you can figure out how to remove that history from GitHub and all that kind of stuff, which is, you just search for that. OK. So I've gone through the intro here. I've got some goals in mind. I've got this GitHub project here. So I'd like to go through this quickly with you. And I don't want to do the whole thing because it's not really, I don't think it's very useful for me to go through and kind of show you all of GitHub's API, and that's a good place for you to spend some time. But what I want to do is show you a couple of the key things that I've noticed while using the GitHub API. That might catch you off guard, save you a few minutes this way. All right. What this app does, if I run node github.js, is it makes, oh, what is going on there? Repos. Ah, I bet my GitHub token is expired. I can probably find that out if I just console log the error, right? So let's see what happens. No, error is null, so I'm not sure. So it's saying for each. See what the data is that we get back. Bad credentials. OK, that's where I got the error. So it was actually in the body. This is kind of interesting, right? Because I would expect if I'm making this call like this, I would expect the error to come back here. But I actually got the error from the API in the body. So that's where we're missing it. It says bad credentials. That means my GitHub token is incorrect. So I'm going to go into github.com. Log in. Good, I've logged in. I go to my settings. I go to my, I guess I want developer settings, and I want to create a personal access token. I don't have any right now. I got rid of it after the last version of this lecture so that you can all take it from me, right? So I generated a new token. Oh no. Yes. And put in a description. I'll just say this is for the demo. Now I've got my new token. I take that, and where do I put that token? .env file, yeah, .env file. Look for my .env file. I look for my GitHub token, and I paste that in here. So now when I make the request, that's much better. I didn't get that error. I'll get rid of that console log body. So, didn't give me any error, just listed out all my repos, told me how many I have. So that code is now working. And it was sort of this error, or this thing that was missing. So, there's a couple other things that I've noticed. For example, I can get away with just not putting that thing there at all. Seems to work just fine, right? What happens if I make this request here using curl with a little bit more debug information? Oops. So I'm going to use -v like I did this morning because I want to see both the request and the response information, that metadata. So I'm going to make my curl -v to users Jensen repos. Scroll up all the way to the top of this. Come on. Oh, wow. Yeah, here it is. I connect. I make my request. It's a GET request to users Jensen repos. The host is API github.com, and my user agent is curl. And then I look at the response, and the response is actually telling me that I have a rate limit of 60. And that I only have 44 requests before I will not be able to make this requests for this anymore. And if I'm just going to run it a few more times. Try and go all the way to the top here. It's going to be here somewhere. Wow. More. That's better. So now, remember it said 44 before? We've only got 38 left. So it's telling me that if I have to test this 38 more times, then I might run out of requests. And this limit is only really about an hour. I have about 60 minutes, and then it will reset this. And there's a way to solve this problem, and it's by using that token. If I make this request, and I use, the token instead. What do I add here? Access underscore token. And I want that to be of this value. Oh, not found. Repos. What's going on here? Always. Oh, there we go. Okay, at least this one works. So here, my rate limit is 5,000 now, and it's simply because I added the token so it knows it's me. And the reason why it wasn't giving me this many before is because it doesn't want to do it for free. Well, maybe not free, but it doesn't want to at least let anyone make that many requests without at least knowing who I am. It's going to let me do it for free, but at first I have to get that token, and then I'm authenticated with them. So now I have 5,000 requests an hour for free from GitHub. There's another little piece here that we might notice. If I remove the headers here, and I log out the body. Oops. I want to just run this node github.js. Here. The request is forbidden by administrative rules. Please make sure your request has a user agent header. So I got that when I removed when I removed that header from here. It started to complain to me I can no longer make this request. And so GitHub has another requirement. It is that we add a user agent header value, and as long as we've done that, then it will give us back the information we're looking for. So the way that we do that here is we're adding headers as an option. This is our options array or object. We're adding headers as an option, and the option we're adding is, or the header we're adding is called user agent. And you know what? Turns out GitHub doesn't care what the value is. It just needs a value. It doesn't like empty, but or it doesn't like no value, but it doesn't mind node application or you know, WTF or whatever. It doesn't care about any of that. But when you're working with this API, you kind of have to keep your eye on what are some of the errors, some of the feedback. Reading the documentation will tell you a lot about this. If we actually go and look at the documentation for this, oops, it's going to say user agent is required. All API requests must have a valid user agent. Valid is a little bit, you know, unsure what that really means because I was able to put node application and they considered that to be valid. Requests with no user agent header will be rejected. We got the message back when that happened. And it looks like user agent can't be blank, though. All right. Those are the details for GitHub, and hopefully that helps you kind of with your assignments if you haven't run into that already. Okay. So the main thing that I wanted to do today, though, was actually write a little bit more substantial code than what GitHub was forcing me, what I was doing with GitHub here, where I was just taking the body of that, which is an array of objects. Each object represents a repo. I parse that. I get an array of repos. I go through each of my repos. I log out the name of that repo, and then I log out the number of repos left. That's a pretty straightforward example. So I didn't want to just do that because it's not really as useful as maybe doing something a little bit more involved. So I'm going to actually use two different API now. I've got two API that I want to use. One of them is for weather, and one of them is for location. So I want to create an application that when I run the application, it figures out where I am in the world, and then based on that, it will find out what the weather is for the next week and tell me what that weather is. So we might see something like node index.js. So we run our application. Okay. Permission denied. Yeah, it doesn't like that. We're going to have to go make those keys. I've got this, I'm using IP stack for one of these things. IP stack will let me give it an IP address, and it will include back for me the latitude and longitude of that IP address, which is actually pretty useful. And I could actually put anyone's IP address in here and look it up. It will tell me. But if I look at the documentation, there are 3 different endpoints: standard lookup, bulk lookup, and requester lookup. So the standard lookup allows me to, as long as I have an access key, pass it an IP address. Okay. That's kind of cool, but I don't know my IP address, right? I could look it up. What's my IP? There it is. This is all our IP, actually. We share this one. So, and we're all at the same location, so that's okay. So I could call this with that information and my access key, and it should give me back the information relevant for that IP. There's a second way to do it. There's actually this thing called bulk IP lookup. What do you think that means? Yeah, you look up more than one, and you get back like an array of locations as a result of that. And so this is slightly different in that we comma separate the IP addresses. Okay, but it's still not what we want because it's required that we have our IP address, and that's an extra step. I don't want my user to have to go through. So what about this one, requester IP lookup? The IP stack API offers a separate API endpoint capable of detecting the IP address which the current API request is coming from. So that's actually what we want. If I just put the word check here instead of an IP address, then it's going to come back to me with my location, my IP address's location. It's going to figure out all web servers, they know where the requests are coming from. They have access to that information, the IP address that's making the request. Therefore, they're able to use that to infer that. Cool. I need to go quickly get my key here. Awesome. I'm going to reset this just to make sure it's nice and new. There we go. And I'm going to put this into my .env, yes. IP stack SK, IP stack secret key. I paste that over top. So now I have my IP stack secret key, and I should be able to go back now with this key. I should be able to run that check thing that I had, right? So we go down here. This is what we want to run. Karl. And then I'll put access, what do they call it, access key, equals. And of course, I left that page, and I lost my, I wish I had more one clipboard right now. All right, I run that, and I've got my response back. It's not very easy to read, and I will do a favor here. I'll prettify it. So here's the actual response that I got back. Hey, that looks familiar. 162.245.144.188. What's my IP? 16. Oh, so it figured it out for me. Good. And then it tells me that I am located. Where is it? In here, right? So I'm located in North America, BC, Canada, and here's my latitude and longitude, and those look to be right for me. So I could actually use this information to do the next step, which is figure out the weather for this location, right? So I got to go over to darksky.net, which is the weather API I decided to use for this. I'm going to log in. I'm going to reset my secret key. This probably, yeah. And I'm going to put this in my env file here. So what this is going to do for me, I'm allowed to make requests to this, and I have to provide 3 pieces of information here. Do I have all that information available to me now? Yeah, I do, right? I have the key. That's what I just reset. So I have that in my environment variable. I've got the latitude and longitude, and those are actually just coming back on my initial request. So I'm going to make one request to IP stack. Give me my current latitude and longitude. Once that response comes back, I'm going to take that response, extract the latitude and longitude from it, and then using those 2 values, make another request to the weather server saying, give me back the weather for this location. And then I'm going to take that weather response, and I'm going to go through it, drill in, and find the next week's worth of data, and then print it out. And it should, at the end, I think, look something like this. It starts off, says, powered by dark sky. Like, why did I put that on there? Sometimes when we're using these API, we have to attribution, right? You're required to display the message powered by dark sky that links to darksky.net powered by. It's a console program. I don't really have links. But I still included that information here because I'm using their API, and that is the requirement for me to use their API. So I'm going to follow their requirements. So I put that little legal thing at the front. That's no problem. And then it finds the location, prints out the name of the location. That comes from IP stack. And then I go through and iterate over a set of data. And we can see, actually, it's looking pretty good this week. It's not even, well, it's below 0 here. Okay. So we curious how we build this? At all? Okay. We'll look at this index file here. I started off at the top. So what's this line for? Acquire the data from .env, exactly. So this is going to read file on .env, load up the text. It's going to then split it up into lines, and then split each line up into key value pairs, and then take all those key value pairs and put them in the environment, our process.env object. So at this point, from now on, process.env IP stack secret key is available to me from this point on. Same with dark sky secret key. Anything after this line of code up here that got added through .env is available. And you'll notice I'm actually using those. I'm using the dark sky secret key here when I make the dark sky request, and I'm using the IP stack secret key here when I'm making the IP stack request. Okay. What is this? What's this line for? Var request equals require request. My third-party request library, the one that I npm installed. You didn't see me do that, but it is here as a dependency. Okay. So now I have access to this request library. I can say, I can call request, I give it a list of options, and then a callback, and it will make that request for me. I'm doing it right down here. I make the request to IP stack, and when I have retrieved the location, then I execute this code here that gets an error, response, and body. We're all familiar with that interface. We take that body, we parse it, and we get the data out of it. And from that data, we're going to say location, Vancouver, BC. City and region code coming from IP stack will be Vancouver, BC. And that's where this line comes from right here. Okay. And then we go and retrieve the weather, because now we know what the location is. And we have the latitude and longitude, and so only now can we actually make the request for the weather. There's actually a dependency here. I can't make the request for the weather until I know where I am. So I have to make the first request and then make the second one. Okay. What about this here? Do you know what that library is? Moment. Okay. Now's the time we would just go search that. If I was looking in code and I found something equals require something, the first thing I'm going to do is just moment, maybe moment.js. I typically like to put JS or Ruby or Python or whatever after it because moment means a lot of things. But moment.js, what is this? Does this sound useful for us for the job that we're doing? So moment will help us format these dates in a really nice way. I'll show you how that works. So that's why we required that library. We want to be able to format dates. I've also got this lookup here. And it says that a clear day has the emoji sun. And a clear night has the nice clear moon. And the cloudy is a cloud. And fog is this kind of weird mountain with the fog. And then you've got rain and sleet and snow and wind, right? So we'll notice that I actually have those icons here. But we're not passing icons from dark sky. Dark sky is just giving us a word that represents the icon we want to use, and then we're able to decide what that word really means. Rain, what does that mean? Oh, it means the rain icon. Rain, what does that mean? Oh, it's this image of someone getting pummeled with rain. It could be anything we want, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the source of the data, we can look in here for icon. And when we get our data back, we'll know where it is. We'll know the time zone. We know what the current weather is, including the icon for that weather, which happens to be rain. So every entry for weather in this is going to have something called an icon. And the icon is going to be their best guess as to how to represent that visually. Make sense? So I've created this lookup table. It says when I have rain, what I want it to actually be is this umbrella with the rain. I'll show you how I use that as well. But that's the purpose of this. It's to map words to emojis. Cool? Okay. Now I've got this legal thing. So we talked about that quickly. All it does is console log some stuff. So I do that first, and then I call retrieve location. I retrieve the location. I get that information back. I print a little bit out. I then want to go retrieve the weather. I use the latitude and longitude to do that. Come up here. Take the latitude and longitude. Now I'm able to make my request. I have the 3 pieces of information that I needed: the key, the lat, and the longitude. When I get that value, when I get the response back from dark sky, I want to call on retrieve weather. On retrieve weather takes in an error or response in a body, just like every request seems to need that. We take the data here. We then take the data. It's an array. We can actually the data is an object. Data has a key called daily. That represents an array of daily weather, I guess, reports. We can see that here. We have currently, minutely, hourly, and daily. Daily has a summary and an icon of its own. So overall, this day is going to be rainy. But at this particular, or let's say, actually, here it says mixed precipitation through the week. So this is actually kind of representing the week's worth average, kind of. So in this example here, it's saying it would be rainy. But then you actually have data which represents each day and the weather for each day, and that has an icon here. So that's kind of why I am going through, grabbing the daily data. For each day, I'm grabbing the first 7 values. Why? Why am I grabbing the first 7 values? What does that represent? Sorry? Yeah, next 7 days, but conceptually, what is a group of 7 days in a row? Usually, yeah, maybe, yeah. So the next week. It doesn't necessarily mean it is exactly the next week, but it represents the next 7 days, or let's say we'll call it the next week's worth of weather. Okay, so I've taken that here, and then I'm going to go through each of these data items here. This data, I'm going to go through this one first, and I'm going to take that, and I'm going to take that day, I'm going to pass it to getWeather. GetWeather is going to take this object and convert it into a smaller object for me, where it's just picking out the parts of information that I actually care about. And it's actually doing a little bit of manipulation as well. So here I'm getting the day's temperature high, and I'm rounding it. So I don't want decimals. I just want it to say 0.6, but not 0.5 or 6.2. We don't care about that. So I round it right here. Same with the low. We just care about the low, but we care about it being rounded already, so we'll do that here as well. Here, this is where I'm actually getting the icon. If the day.icon is equal to rain, then what I want to do is I want to look up in my weather object for the key rain, and I get back this value here. That's how I get the umbrella to show up. My icon becomes the umbrella or an empty string, depending if that value exists or not, okay? And then also I have this date, this moment here. I can take the day.time, which is actually a timestamp. Does anyone not know what a timestamp is? Pretty clear? So we take this timestamp, and it's in seconds, so I need to multiply it by 1,000 to make it milliseconds. And I pass that to moment, and moment gives me back an object that represents that date in time, that date. Okay. Now that I have the weather for that day, I can take the weather's date, and I can format it like so, and then I print it out. And this is actually happening in a loop here, so that's why we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Make sense? So overall, that's how the program works. Let's build it up from the beginning here again. So the only thing I'm going to leave is my requires and my I'm going to leave just this lookup table, because there's no point in me writing that again. And we're going to start at the beginning here, where we need to make a request, right? Request. And I can pass it a URL. I can pass it a string or an object of options. And I prefer to do that right now. The option that I want to give it happens to have a URL. And the URL that I get for this is going to be here under the documentation for IP stack. I'm going to grab this URL, and I place that here. And so now I'm making a request to this URL. When I get the response back, what is the response? What do I get back in this function again? The IP address. So I'm not going to. I will get the IP address, but that's part of the body of the response. This is just the function that I'm passing to the request. What do we expect the request library to give back to us when it calls our callback? There's 3 values. There are 3 arguments that we error. That's 1. Usually null, hopefully null. Second one was? Third one's body. Yeah. So error, response, and body. So error is pretty straightforward. Tells us if there's an error. Obviously, it didn't work sometimes because the errors get returned in the body. But we'll get an error. Maybe it'll be null. The response will have things like the status code on it, perhaps, right? And then the body, that's actually going to have the information that we're interested in. So I could console log the body of this request here. I run it. We take a look. And I got some bunch of stuff back here. But I was hoping for, oh wait, it was check. Right? So here's the root of my API, but I actually have to put check here because there's 3 ways to call this thing, right? Single lookup, bulk lookup, or check, which is request or lookup. And what I want is request or lookup. So let me try that again now, see if this is a bit better. Oh, that is better in the sense that I feel closer to my goal, although it still doesn't work, right? So what's it telling us? No access key. Okay. We go back to the documentation. How is it that they expect us to give them the access key? There's a term for this little end of the path question mark that we add. Everything after it could be considered the query string. Query string. Okay. And the way the query string works is, and you will have seen this, I promise. You'll have seen that when I go to google.com, for example, oh, why does it not redirect me sometimes? Maybe I go to Google Canada. I don't know. This has changed recently enough. Let's try that. No. Ah, this is better. Here's some stuff. Here's some information that is included on this request. Modal active equals none. All right? So that would be a piece of information that the server actually has access to. It's just that everything before the question mark is the path. Everything after the question mark is the query string. And so what they're telling us here is that we create a key called access key, and we make that part of the query string. I have 2 options for this with the request library. That's one way, right? So I can just append it to the end of my URL, and I think this works. Let's just, yeah, that's looking good. It's telling me I'm from BC and from Vancouver, okay. This is not the only way to do this, though, because we actually have the option here to do a query string object as well. So instead of maybe adding this onto the end here ourselves, we'll not just give it the URL, but also a query string configuration, and that is going to contain the name of the key and its value here. And when we make this request, ultimately, this is still just getting put together and added to the end of the request, except we're able to define it as an object with key value pairs, which is a little bit nicer than having to do this key 1 equals value 1, and key 2 equals value 2, and key 3 equals value 3. A little harder to read that. I find that adding keys to an object like this is a little more clear in JavaScript. Let's make sure this works as well. It looks like it does. 2 ways to do the same thing, right? Okay. So I'm getting the body now, and this body includes a whole bunch of information. It's right here. The extension that I'm using here is actually called like prettified JSON. So I'm just running this on it. Prettified JSON is going to take me back to sort of a nicely rolled out version of this text. So I got the IP, the type, continent. What I care about right now is the city and the region code, because I wanted to be able to print. That's going to be too hard to probably get up there. Yeah, whatever. You remember, right? It said Vancouver, BC, location Vancouver, BC. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to say, when I've received the location, then I may as well at this point console log out location is equal to, oh, I need that data, right? Can I just say body.city? Or body.region code? Can I do that? Can I say body.city? Is that okay? Why not? have to parse it first, right? Because this is a string, and this is like me saying string.city, and that doesn't exist. So what I need to do first is parse it. So I'm going to say my location is equal to JSON.parse the body. And so now this is not going to be a string anymore. It's going to be an object that has city and region code keys. So I think that we would get location Vancouver, BC out of that. Okay. Now, I have to do something else now. I have the location. Maybe I want to do kind of redundant, actually. So I've got these two values. Oh, localization. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Maybe I'll console log that out first, just to make sure it's good. Again, latitude. Thank you. Okay. So here's the output, saying it's 49th parallel here, negative 123. It's about where we are. But that's not what I want to do with the data. I don't want to print it out. Instead, what I want to do is I want to make a request to a URL. And that URL is determined sort of by the dark sky documentation. So we look here, and we see this is the structure of the URL we use to make the request to dark sky. And I have to put three pieces of information in here, right? The first one is the key. So they're not actually, it doesn't seem like they're giving me the option to do a query string. They expect this to be a parameter. So I'm going to put this in here as a parameter. I guess that's it. Maybe I'll double check by just looking at my environment variable. Dark sky SK. Dark sky SK, that looks good. Okay, so I've got the key. I'm concatenating this string together. The next thing that I have is this latitude. I created a variable with that name, so I should just be able to do that. And then I'm also going to attach this like little symbol here. I hate this type of concatenation. Can't wait till tomorrow when we learn a better way. So here, my URL starts off with this forecast, adds on the dark sky key, adds a /, and then does latitude, comma, longitude. So let's just, sometimes if we try and do the request with this, we might spend an hour debugging something that just came down to maybe a malformed URL. So it might not hurt just to throw that in here, run it, and see, is this about what I was looking for? And it is, right? It's got the key, it's got the longitude and latitude in the format that works for me. And if I copy this, can I do a curl request to it? Yes, and it gives me back a whole bunch of information. So I've confirmed that this works outside of the request library, outside of JavaScript. And that to me is pretty important because now I'm more confident going back into JavaScript and saying, if I make a request to this, I should get the result back that I'm looking for. Okay. So now, function takes in error, response, body. And we'll just take a look at the body. Oops. So node index.js, we'll do that. And it looks like I got back pretty much what I got back if I ran curl, so that's a good sign. Now, I'm going to dive back into this documentation, and I'm going to just take a peek. What is it that we were most interested in? Out of this whole sort of like, they give us a overview of all the data that they pass in, or pass back to us. Sorry? Icon, that was important. We care about these chunks of weather though, right? We care about these objects that represent the weather for a certain point in time. So the time will be dictated by this timestamp. The icon is definitely there. We also have things like, I think, temperature low and temperature high there. So let's just start by drilling into this thing. Let's look at, well, I guess the first one is, let's get that data out of it. So we're going to have to take that string, convert it into an object. And so now, when we look at data, this might be a better representation. Hard to say. It's a little bit better. I'm getting back these arrays of objects, but I guess the first thing I get back is latitude, longitude, time zone. Currently, I could figure out currently that it is a clear day, and that would print out what my current weather is. But if I keep looking at this, I've got minutely. I don't want to do it for the next hour. Okay, and that looks like 60, maybe 60 objects, one each representing a minute of the day. That's kind of powerful. Hourly, so are there 24 of these? Maybe. I don't know. That looked like a lot more. Daily is what I'm actually looking for, because I want to grab the weather for a day, each day for the next 7 days. So now I would go in here and I'd take data.daily, and I'm just going to look at this object. I'm going to kind of drill down even more and say, well, what's in here? This is an array of objects. Or sorry, this is an object that has a summary, an icon, and data. And data happens to be the array of objects that I'm looking for. So I'm going to drill down a little bit more into that. And I'm going to just print it out again. Is this the data that I want to be working with? An array of objects, each object representing a day's worth of weather. So to me, that makes some sense. And I think we've got the icon, including with our lookup table. This should work just fine. We've got the temperature high, the temperature low. So it looks like it's data.daily.data that I'm looking for here. And I'm going to take this daily.data, or data.daily.data, and I'm going to take that day's worth of data, remember 1 day at a time, and I'm going to console log day.icon. Just to kind of see what we get for each of these values. We run it, and that's what it did. It went through every single, I didn't actually have to do, well, I've got 8 days here. So if I wanted to, I could first slice that up and say, and that takes us a little bit closer to what I had originally. So now when I run this, I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, just the next 7 days. Okay. So that means that inside this function, for each day of the week, I have all that information that I need, and I need to create that the output for that. And so what I wanted was I wanted to show me the day of the week, the month. So like Wednesday, Monday, December 3rd, Tuesday, December 4th, etc. So I'm having to format those dates. The only thing I have that's a reference to a date right now is this time, and it's a time in seconds since January 1st, 1970. So I can use this. This is why I brought Moment into it. I was like, Moment.js, very useful for dealing with dates in JavaScript. I've already installed it. And so I have the ability to take a moment object and format it in a certain way. So we can see, if I wanted to say December 3rd, 2018 with the time, then the format string that I would use would represent that. Where 4ems means, let's go to the documentation. Where are you? Oh, docs, there we go. So under format or display, 4ems means that it will output the full month of the year. Whereas a single or 2ems is going to give us the numerical value prefixed by 0 for single-digit numbers. So you can actually pretty much get any combination you want out of this. We can see that if we use do, it actually does the tith, the est, erd thing for us. We don't have to think, is this a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, and what sort of a suffix do we put on that? And especially if we're in another language. Imagine if we had to do this for English and French. The translations are done for us already in Moment. We just have to set the locale, and so a library like this is very useful. So what I want to do is I want to give Moment the current date, or the current timestamp, and that timestamp is going to convert, it's going to convert into a date object, and I can call format on that object. So, let's say var date is equal to moment day dot time times 1000. Now, moment expects it to be in seconds, or sorry, moment expects it to be in milliseconds, but the Dark Sky API gives it to us in seconds, so I have to convert to milliseconds for use in moment. So what we actually end up with, that's moment's representation. If I just try and print out that object, this is how it toStrings for us. What I want to do, though, is date.format. And I don't know, one of them was MMMMMM, right? So December, 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 December. Okay, that's a good start. What was the next thing that we wanted to be on there? We'll go to display, we'll go to format. How did we want this to show up? It was the day of the week, maybe? So where do we find that in here? Day of the week. Okay. Which one of these do we want to use? DO, that would show us, like, that would be the number. So that would be, if we did that right away, it would be first, second, third, etc. If we try that, I'll show you. DO. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 0. And that's actually giving us sort of like the numerical day of the week, rather than the day of the month, which is kind of what we... so we want to show the day of the week, which is actually Monday. And then we want to show the month, and then we want to show the day of the month. So we're going to start off with DDDD for day of the week. Put that in there. Run it. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Now we're going to put a comma after, now we're going to put the month in there, 4 M's. Monday, December, maybe we put a comma in there. Okay. And then again, if this was French, I'd be getting décembre and all that instead if it was set to French. So the library thing here, super useful. I say December what? Today is December 3rd, right? So what we really want is day of the month here, which is capital D-O instead of lowercase d-o. And this is going to give us Monday, December 3rd, Monday, December 4th, Wednesday, December 5th, etc. Okay? So I know that's a quick thing on the date stuff. Take a peek if you're interested, but you will have the opportunity to use moment at least on 2 separate assignments I've seen people use it for. Maybe 3. Lots of opportunity to use moment. Anytime you're thinking about using dates, think about moment.js. Okay. So that's our format. Okay, good. What we want now is we wanted to show the low and the high temperature. So in our object here, it's the temperature low that we're interested in. So I'm going to say temperature low. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, it's putting 32.07, 31.57, it's putting all that right there, and I kind of want it to be separated by space, so I have to do this concatenation garbage. A little bit better. You know what? This might actually be nicer if it was separated by a tab, and so I do it that way. So now I get all those characters. They're all on the same line. And that's just because I've tabbed everything over. And I might want to do tab just in case we get a super long date string, and then this would move everything. Okay. What's the problem with this? This is not the format I want, right? Fahrenheit, yeah, and we're not into that. So, and sorry if you are. What I want to do is quickly take a look at, say, like units. So I could actually tell it what units, when I'm making the request, I need to give it some information. Here are the units that I'm actually interested in, and my options are auto, CA, UK, Wingust, US, SI. I think CA makes sense, although SI SI I guess would work as well, as long as I'm not using the default, which is US. So we will, in our setup here, QS, it's a query string that I'm going to use for this. So QS, it's units, I think, units, yeah, is equal to CA. I'll just try that. Now when I run this, that's much better, right? That's giving me the actual Celsius version of that, okay? What am I missing though? I forgot to do something. Yeah, let's round it. So we'll put math.round. Okay, we're almost done, I promise. So now we're getting that, and I can, what is it, degree symbol? It's this thing, right? So I want to grab that. Best way to do this usually is just to like copy and paste it from some other website. Right? So I just copy and paste that little dot. I don't know what the character code for that is. It's not on my keyboard, so I ran that, and now I run this again. Now I got my little dot there, like that. Okay. So to math.round day.temperature high. Okay. Need that little dot again, I'll get it. Okay. It's the last step. Icon, yeah. It's the best part, actually. This is getting, unfortunately, long, but we will add more onto it. We'll say we have a, let's put a tab in there. Let's put a tab after that, and we'll say that we have the day.icon. Okay. Pretty good. What was the last step, though? How do we convert this string into emoji? We could say, if the icon is partly cloudy night, then use this emoji. If the icon is clear day, then use this emoji. If the icon is partly cloudy night, then use this emoji. And you see where I'm going with this? You end up having a list of if statements. And the only real difference is this mapping that you've created of an icon to an emoji, or of a word to an emoji. So instead, what I like to do, instead of a whole bunch of different if statements, is I have the key that I want to use to look up in this object. So I could actually just say weather, oops, rain, and that gives me the emoji. It's not if whatever the value is rain, then give me the emoji. Make sense? Somewhere? Yeah? Okay. So here what I do instead is I grab this icon, I do a lookup in the weather for that icon, and now when I run it, it's going to show me the emojis instead. Okay. Yeah, things change a little bit there. Like since the last time, since we ran it at the beginning, right? And yeah, because it looked like, well, I don't know, I've been clearing this constantly, so it's not easy to compare, but. So this code, not going to be exactly what I showed you at the beginning, but they both do the same thing. I would just say the code that's in the notes is a little bit more modularized. We split it out into functions, gave them a bit better names, that kind of thing. Any questions about this? How we put that together? Okay. Well, let me make sure, and I think I'm good to go. GitHub, Jensen, and this is Node app notes. Okay. So environment, we did that. Configuration, separating code and config. Secrets, .env library. We talked about, well, I said put it in your gitignore. Everyone knows what that means. Put your env file in your gitignore. Awesome. Using the request library, we did that. Some advanced requests. Yep. Okay, this talks about I actually had many options when it came to the API that I used. I just chose to use dark sky. But I could have used Yahoo Weather. I could have used Open Weather Map, and it would have just been slightly different. I make a request, slightly format is slightly different, get a different response back, but maybe it has the same data in it, right? Same with location API. I had like 3 different options for this, and I just chose to use IP stack because it gave me enough requests to do it free. Deal with dates, bonus. Oh, and then I've added a bonus here. So if you're interested in more of this, I've got a translate example where I went through and actually used IBM Watson to do a translation from English to conversational Spanish. And so we would translate this array of words. And if I run this, I don't think I have, you know what? I don't think I have my token, so I don't think it's going to work, but we'll try it anyways. Yeah, it's not going to like it. I'd have to go into the website, get my login and password for that, put it into my environment file, and then I'd be able to run it. And if you want to check it out, sign up for Watson. Lots of cool stuff. Like, it's not just translation, but also natural language processing. You could find some sentiment from a paragraph of words. That's kind of interesting. So Watson will let you do that. Worth signing up for, and then you could test this out if you wanted to. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Sorry if we went over a little bit.